Hello and welcome to the Free Associates. That's right, folks, the Free Associates, the freedom of association, the freedom to associate with anything, any idea that comes our way. Because why? Because freedom is excellent. It's so good. It's so good for an exchange of ideas. And so we like to keep it loose. That's what we do. We stay loose, and we come into the conversation knowing little, and we end the conversation knowing just a little more. But we try to stay away from any kind of expertise, which is interesting because this show will be talking about expertise. We're not experts. We would never schedule a topic on which we're experts because that would be a disaster. That's not what we do. And so we're welcome to the Free Associates. You'll notice that on Facebook, we have a page. We'd love it if you like it. Love it if you like it. That's a good album name. This is our card, our business card, the Free Associates. Isn't that beautiful gold? I had those made right before the pandemic. Can't hand them out for a little while, unfortunately, but boy, they're going to be worth a lot when this thing is done. We also have the freeassociates.us. What we usually do is we do a reading and then we discuss it. We just kind of kick it around a little bit. And so that is what we do on this show. If you're listening on WMUA Amherst, you're listening to a rebroadcast. So every day we do it on Facebook Live, and the next day we put it on so that people of the valley, the verdant green valley that we live in, can have some connection. Waylon, how you doing, pal? It's good, man. I'm so jealous of your van, and we're going to talk about that later. I mean, this is just, you got to stay tuned because he's got a picture of this thing. It's beautiful. But I want to bring on our guest, and we actually have a really valued guest today because our guest is going to need to trot in just a couple of 7-8 minutes. But Catherine Chiavaroli, is that right? Can I do the last name? Is that okay?
Very close. Chiavaroli. Good job, Norm.
Thanks. It's so good to have you on. You're an old friend of my wife and I, and we love your family so much. And you're in Hatfield, is that right?
Yes, it's beautiful out here, and we're very thankful for the space.
Oh, I'll tell you, I've never been more seasonally affected than during this situation. I mean, when it's sunny, I'm like, everything's going to be fine. When it's cloudy, I'm like, I think this could be the end of the world. So thank God for the sun.
Very true. Very true. It's nice to see people out walking the dike behind us when it's sunny, and then when no one's around, it's quite dreary.
Gloomy. Now, listen, we'd like to talk to you a little bit about real estate. You have both residential and commercial real estate in Northampton and Amherst, right? Isn't that your specialty?
That's correct. Yes.
So tell us. I mean, obviously, this is major. So if can illuminate a little bit what your experience has been, particularly with your retail tenants.
Sure.
So shutdown.
So as soon as we started getting notice that we might experience a shutdown in Massachusetts, we created a COVID website ourselves with as much information that we could give both our residential and commercial tenants. We started out with, where they could order food and through what sites, who was open. The Amherst Area Chamber of Commerce has done an incredible job, as well as the Northampton's Chamber, of updating everybody, providing tons of links to, again, both residential and commercial tenants. So we started out with that. Our commercial tenants have really, both in Northampton, Hadley, and Amherst, been very strong. Everyone obviously they're nervous. No one knows exactly what's going to go on. Last Friday alone, applying for the PPP loan through the CARES Act was very challenging. We got notification that the rules changed 3 times in 2 days. So it was moment to moment as people were applying for this loan. And it's very challenging to figure out exactly what you qualified for, depending on what type of business you had. And for those of you who don't know, that this loan is for payroll, it's for your rent, mortgage interest, and utilities, and it's supposed to last for 8 weeks, just to help everyone stay employed in the area. And then there's also another $10,000 forgivable grant that's being offered commercially as well. So we're trying to help all of our tenants, especially those where English might not be their first language, to apply for the grants, to give them as much information and help as we can to help them survive this time. And we truly expect that everything will be okay soon, but we all need to take our time and hopefully take some takeout because they are relying still, many of them, on takeout at this point. But they're
You know,
working. The
are
retail's
these
working as hard as they can.
are these kind of like low interest loans? Is that the idea of them? I mean,
They're actually for the most part forgivable. These
right,
two
right.
particular loans, if you use them for the things I mentioned before, they're supposed to be forgivable as well
Wow.
as the $10,000 grant.
Wow.
The SBA is offering other loans, which have different rates for nonprofits and commercial. I believe it's 3.759 for profit businesses, and it's lower for nonprofit. And that can be up to a 30-year term, depending on what, again, you're going to use the money for and your cash flow this year over the previous year. So
Now,
they base it on that.
we've talked about this for a while. Retail is obviously in a funny situation anyway, right? It's been challenged for a while. What is your feeling? I mean, do you feel like most of these businesses are going to be able to kind of come back? Because they're food, they have an advantage, right?
So luckily, a lot of our tenants are experience based, as is the current trend. We don't have any typical retailers. We have a bar, a nightclub, Pilates, coffee, and then lots of different types of restaurants that lease from us. So I think all of our tenants should be safe. I think the majority of people will be chomping at the bit to get out of their homes and go experience things better and eat a variety of foods. It's one of my favorite things about the United States is that every night of the week you can eat from a different country. That
Yeah.
is becoming challenging in our household, I know. Um, but so I have high hopes for everything. But I was really see that stores like A to Z um, now have an online component. Richardson
Hmm.
circumstance, it's forced retailers to go online. And I think that once this is over, they will then have the capacity to have in person and online, and hopefully they'll succeed even further.
Yeah, well, that would be good. And A to Z has got a really good setup there. So you're bullish, and Waylon is bullish too. So that's
Well, it depends on the type of restaurant from who I've heard from. I mean, it's been relatively slow. People are a little scared at this point to go out. Um, I think they've dropped off to sometimes only a handful of people a day. So they're minimizing staff, and some have closed. Some are minimizing staff just the owners themselves. So hopefully, with the loan that we were just speaking about, the payroll loan, they'll at least be able to keep their employees paid while solely working as sole proprietors during this time because it has dropped off significantly,
yeah,
understandably so.
yeah, yeah. That's a smart loan because you keep people employed. That means they're not on unemployment. It means they're still attached to the businesses that they're in. Seems like a smart law. So yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that at this point, I mean, the SBA was so flooded on Friday that we could hear some updates on the loans. That is the number one question I get from my commercial tenants is when do you think we'll get the loans? And unfortunately, I know less than the bankers who don't seem to know terribly much at this point. So I'm hoping information starts flowing a little bit more freely in the next coming days.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks so much. We know that you have to jet, but thanks so much for being on the show, and we want to get you back on real soon.
I'd love to be back. Thanks for having me. Sorry I have to leave early, but I've got to take care of the kids.
That's what it is. Okay, thanks. We'll talk to
Bye
you soon.
bye.
Bye-bye. So yes, Waylon, she's your kind of person. She believes that we're all going to be back out in a couple of weeks, or 3 or 4 weeks, and that business will come back. So that's music to your ears. No. Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 I agree with you. I think the whole alcohol sales thing is kind of weird. Like, I don't totally understand. I don't now here's my only thinking on this is there are some dry towns in Massachusetts, like Arlington's dry, but it's not dry. There's no liquor stores. So I don't know, maybe because otherwise, why wouldn't you just go to the liquor store? Because you're right. I'm not going to pay a premium for a beer unless I'm sitting outside in a park. It doesn't make sense to me. So there's something funny about it, to be sure.
There we go. Hey, Kim, can you hear me? Sorry, we were having a technical difficulty. The microphone was disconnected but I think that you could hear me now on the live stream. So hopefully you can
Okay.
hear me now. Test
We
three,
also,
one, two. There we go. Thank you for that, Cam.
and also Catherine kind of cut out a minute there too. So that might be some of the issue. Listen, Waylon, can I just say you look excellent? I really feel like this
You
should
like
be.
this? You like this?
I like it, man. I like it. This is my uniform. I got my shirt.
I
I got
know.
my jacket. I feel like this is good for you because it's got a Steve Jobsy kind of quality, but it's
Yeah, you
clean.
just got to. Yeah, I don't like. I like the modesty in the clothing. I'm a modesty in the clothing kind of guy. I like to be like somebody that you don't judge a book by its cover. So I like to dress a little just like dingy.
Well,
And so then
but
it's like,
your facial hair is kind of weird.
well, don't
That
judge a
makes up.
don't judge a guy that drives around in a shabby van with a mustache by its by his cover is what I'm saying.
Well, you carry it off. You somehow carry it off, so that's good. Should we move on? I do want to take. I have to
Yeah,
say
let's do
that
it.
I was filled with envy this weekend. I got that picture of you working on your van. I was also impressed. Do you have skills, like carpentry skills, or is that a pretty easy job you're doing on the back of that van?
Well, so full disclosure, I was over my one of my best friends, Greg Fellman's house, who has a whole bunch of tools and everything. So
Okay.
that's where I was doing it. We started it together, and then the
Yeah.
next day we probably did about 30%, and then I understood how to kind of operate, and I did the next 70% myself. But
Well, that's all you
yeah,
need. You need someone who's gonna like point you in the right
let me
direction.
see if let me see if I can bring up. Do you want to do some show and tell?
Do you want to do show and tell now? Let's show and tell.
Let's see. Okay,
You
so let me
just
see
tell
if
me
I can
what
bring
we.
this up. Okay, so this is my van. This is what I was doing this week. Boom.
This is the free van that Wayland was given at a gas station. Free van, perfect for what you're doing to it because it's got no windows on the back sides, right?
Yep.
This is a sleeper van. This is a sleeper van.
So yeah, so today I'm gonna try to sand that down. I'm stain it, get it all there.
Oh,
So
what stain color? What are you going stain color?
so I'm probably gonna go. It's actually called what is it called? It's something like colonial maple, which is kind of like this reddish hue. I used it for this
Cool.
platform that I made, but it's nice. It's a little lighter than like a mahogany or something like that, or a red cedar or whatever. So it's kind of
Are
like
you
red
gonna
cedar, but a little lighter.
are you gonna shellac it?
Yeah,
Gonna shellac that?
got
Oh
it,
yeah,
got
gonna
it too.
shellac it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, it's excellent.
Do you want
All
it?
right, pull up my picture.
Okay, let's do it. Boom.
I was inspired. What we have here is a pot. This has got to be a classic, like photo student kind of picture, right? Waylon, how would you critique this photo? You're the expert.
Well, I don't know what the hell is going on in it, but
That's good though. It's good that you don't know. That's
yeah.
kind of
So
like
this is okay. So this is my guess for what's going on. Okay, um, I'm going to say that is you're doing something. You're like air seasoning with the tea. Is that what's going on?
yeah. You're giving us too much credit. Remember, it's in the sink. That should be a clue.
So there's tea bags instead of rice or couscous. Is that what I'm seeing?
Close. it's a pot of oatmeal that's got hot water in it so that it doesn't stick
Oh,
inside, and then there's a couple tea bags just thrown in there.
I see.
So this could be like, could title this "The Ruins of Breakfast" or something like that. What do you think?
I thought
It's
it was
kind of
I thought it was some harebrained Northampton scheme to for like some sort of miracle health food
Ah,
right there.
miracle cure for COVID. No, it's not. What do you think? It's a good photo or not? What's your thoughts on that? It got you thinking.
What
You couldn't figure out what it was.
compositionally and everything? Are you talking about?
Compositional. Yeah, totally.
Oh no, no good.
Really? What's wrong with it?
So, and I mean, this if a kid came back from class and,
Yes,
I got
that's
this.
what I'm asking you.
So okay, so there's a couple of things going on with it. One, you fell into what I call the tourist trap. So the tourist trap is where you just center everything. If you use your eyes, now I'm getting into teacher mode, but everything that we see is if you're looking at something, you can't, in your peripheral vision, things are blurry. We have really good peripheral vision. You can see like 180 degrees over here, but you don't actually see it. Like you were supposed to make sure that there's no saber-toothed tiger jumping out of the bushes and eating you. Where you actually focus all your attention is the center of your gaze, like immediately to the middle. And everything else from in that pinpoint center blurs and starts to degrade when it comes to your focus. So when we take pictures, our first initial gut reaction is to zoom in and center whatever we're looking at, because that's how we see the world, rather than putting things to the right or the left. And that's where the rule of thirds comes into play. So that's
Okay. All right. Really
I feel
should
like
take your night school course. That's fine. That's fine. I accept it. Listen, I'm not defensive. I'm not defensive.
I do like. I will say this though. I do like inside of the picture. I do like what's going on with the reflections, and I do like what's going on with the tonal values, the lightness and darkness of the picture. So it's not a total wash right here, but you can't put just things into the center just because we have a natural tendency to do that. You want to move away from doing that, but the lights and darks and the actual, like that bulbous reflection, really good.
Yeah, thanks, pal. Classic teacher move. Break them down, break them, and then build them back up again with compliments. I'll accept it. Although I do have to say, your theory runs the risk of everything being very arty and on the side, right? Like nothing is centered,
Oh no! Wait. We want to get into it. You can do. Who is the master of centered symmetry? I'll give you a hint. Cinematographer, director.
Okay, hold on. Cinematographer, director. Oh, Kubrick.
Well, he's very good too, especially in 2001. But correct
and
answer?
The Shining. Oh no! Give me another hint, man. I'm a cineast.
Whimsical and retro.
Anderson?
Yes. Everything in his movies is centered symmetry composition. It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, Kubrick too, though. Shining. Look at the symmetry in The Shining all over it. But yeah, Wes Anderson. That's a conversation for a different time. I actually got into Facebook conversation about Harold and Maude, and that movie's so influential because Wes Anderson comes right out of that film, and so much to other directors. But anyway, shall we move on? We shall. Now, do you want me to read this text? Now, every weekday, we've been looking at a different thing from Politico, a little couple of paragraphs of someone predicting how this COVID might impact American society. Do you want me to read that aloud, Waylon?
Yeah. Just talk about it a little bit because I got to bring in the graphic for it. But
so, and it's it's been interesting because a bunch of different authors it's usually somehow in their wheelhouse. That is, if they're interested in polarization, that's what they're tackling. And that makes all the sense in the world. And what Waylon and I, and often our guests, are trying to do is trying to say, well, is this really going to happen? We've looked at social distancing. Waylon and I agreed, although our guest Elena Fragamini disagreed. Actually, she agreed with the article. We disagreed with the article. I was somewhere in the middle. Waylon thinks that people are going to be running into each other's arms by June. And I mean, I kind of think so too, but I don't think everybody will. That's for sure. And then we also looked at polarization, and I made the argument that the economic stuff might decrease polarization because it's going to shake up the system so significantly.
Yeah.
And so we've been kind of moving through these. Today's one is about expertise. Okay. So Waylon, should we go ahead and read that?
Yep. And in
Yeah.
about 5 seconds,
Yeah.
I'm going to have it.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this one's called The Return to Faith in Serious Experts by Tom Nichols. He's a professor at the U.S. Naval War College and the author of The Death of Expertise. America for several years has become a fundamentally unserious country. This is the luxury afforded us by peace, affluence, and a high level of consumer technology. We didn't have to think about things that once focused our minds: nuclear war, oil shortage, high unemployment, skyrocketing interest rates. Terrorism has receded back to being a kind of notional threat for which we dispatch volunteers in our military to the far corners of the desert as the advance guard of the homeland. We even elevated a reality TV star to the presidency as a populist attack on the bureaucracy and expertise that makes most of the government function on a day-to-day basis. The COVID-19 crisis could change this in two ways. First, it has already forced people to accepting that expertise matters. It was easy to sneer at experts until a pandemic arrived, and then people wanted to hear from medical professionals like Anthony Fauci, if that's how you say his name. Second, it may, one might hope, return Americans to a new seriousness, or at least move them back towards the idea that government is a matter for serious people. The colossal failure of the Trump administration, both to keep Americans healthy and to slow the pandemic-driven implosion of the economy, might shock the public enough back to insisting on something from government other than emotional satisfaction. Oh boy. Okay, so we have a pretty bold statement here. What's your thoughts, Waylon?
Well, the first thing that sticks out is that it is taking for granted the idea that that this is perceived as a Trump failure. When you look at his approval rating hovers around somewhere in the mid 40s to high 40s. So just right there, I think that that kind of just blows this hypothesis out of the water, because you would need for people to be understanding and analyzing all this in the same way and coming to the same conclusions. So that sticks out immediately. And second off, the amount of misinformation that I see distributed every day is just absolutely mind-boggling. So even if people are subscribing to the idea that there is a inkling of seriousness in the experts that they're digesting their information from, people don't understand what an expert is. So in this democratized version of information, people are thinking that there's serious experts when in fact it's somebody probably, pawning some sort of thing like Alex Jones did with his whatever snake oil that he was selling. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of problems with this little article. It's interesting that we're talking about someone who's basically an expert on the death of expertise, right? Because that's the book that's going to be coming out, or has already come out. And so, technically this guy is supposed to be an expert on this, but, your point is really well taken. There's no mention of how the internet has really changed stuff. And this is an idea I've had for many years, is that in a way we're living not through the dark ages, but like what I would call the blinding light ages. That is, so much information is going out all the time that it all gets negated. An example of this is a lot of Kennedy assassin conspiracy theorists think that the CIA was running like 6 Oswalds at one time. Have you ever heard that theory? And there's some proof to back it up. Anyways, it's not unusual for covert operations to not try to keep information secret, but to have so much information that you just can't figure it out. You can't sort it, because it's much easier, instead of keeping a secret, just to overload people with information, because then they can't figure it out. And
especially,
so I agree.
Yeah. Especially as how disguised I think everything is. I mean, just think about us for a moment. We're like we always, rail against trying to be experts or anything, but there's a certain level of heightened, at least perceived expertise when it comes to certain things when we think about branding. So just think about this graphic right here, right? If we didn't have this graphic and it was just a Zoom, this is the only thing that is separating us from being on a Zoom call, right? So it's just when people, it's easy to get caught up in believing that somebody is a serious expert, because the things that we usually utilize to discern who's an expert is or not is production quality, visualization, the rhetoric that is being used. So even things like just it's just mind-boggling how we can get trapped in that so easily for just such aesthetic/topical things.
Absolutely. And I actually think in a lot of ways, this piece more than the other pieces cuts really to the bone of what we try to do on the show. And what we're very like, I think, skeptical of ourselves, because what you say is expertise based on what? Based on production quality, based on resources, based on wealth, based on aesthetic choices. Where does someone become an expert? So I really agree with you, Waylon, on that one. Also, I just think there's a couple of sentences that are like, that are so tilted. One of them is the colossal failure of the Trump administration, both to keep Americans healthy and to slow the pandemic-driven implosion of the economy. That second part, I don't know. I think that might be asking for too much. Now, here's when I read this, Waylon, I would like to get your opinion on this. When I read this, first of all, I didn't really like the first paragraph either. He's basically saying Americans are unserious and unfocused. But what about global warming? I mean, he's acting like we're just like partying all the time. I think we know that we've just been through an age of massive anxiety. It's not like people aren't focused on anxious stuff. Global warming's way scarier than high interest rates or terrorism because it's so vast. And just on a side note, I know I've recommended this to you, but the Philosophize This podcast is amazing. And one of the ones he does, and which I want to do with you, is Walter Lippmann, who wrote a really important essay in 1922 that's called Public Opinion. And he basically says, you know what, like in a democracy, everything is so complicated and vast, you can't possibly even know one subject well enough to talk on it. And so what we do instead is we're funneled into these tracks of opinions that we're fed and then kind of restate. But there's no way you can know this stuff because it's so deep. Maybe you can know one thing, but you can't be an expert on global warming and healthcare for all and, like school choice. Like it's just not possible.
Well, in addition to that too, just to add and support what you're saying, we live in an age where new revelations about every industry and every specialization rapidly change because of the technology that's being integrated into it. So you might be an expert in something, but the solutions to the problems hyper evolve to the point where in 2 or 3 or 4 years, you might be the information that you have and the technologies that were being used were obsolete, and you're now having to constantly update yourself and update your knowledge and your skills and your information, to the point where you can easily just lose track of what's going on. That's the other part.
Well, and the other part of that even is there's a danger there that once you're attached to one like reasoning, that you're going to resist those changes that technology is bringing. You're not going to adapt. Like that would be the best scenario. There's this great example, and I can't remember if I read it in George Packer's book, The Unwinding, where he's talking about experts. He's talking about cardiologists. And he talks about how every year there's a cardiologist convention and all these heart doctors go to it, and the fatality rates drop for heart patients because they're doing like really unnecessary procedures that are like dangerous because it's like,
oh, really? Ooh.
Yeah, it's like the wisdom of the cardiologist community. Experts can really work against themselves. So here's my meta attack on this.
Yeah.
Piece, and this is like an aerial bombing. This is like Vietnam rolling thunder on this thing. He acts like suspicion of experts is some kind of like fruity thing, that it's not based on something. My contention is that the reason people rejected experts, the reason that a populist movement arose, is because expertise was utilized in the favor of institutions to really pillage the American public in certain parts, like the banking stuff and other things. Like the fact that people have rejected experts is based it's not just, you can't just call it a populist movement. It is a populist movement, but it's based on the fact that like American capitalism became scam capitalism. And if you're on the wrong side of that dam, you just got flooded out of existence. It's not based just on like people being whimsical. I feel like that's a really naive attitude to have. I think that faith in institutions have eroded because a lot of institutions have fed on the American public. What are your thoughts on that? And if so, and if that's true, then we have to deal with that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, distrust, and two, the best way that I've seen it put was by Stephen Colbert on the Colbert Report. And it comes down to what he was talking about. It was at the time, it was a term they was coining because of Republicans, but this holds true for everyone across the political spectrum. And it was the definition of truthiness. Truthiness is the idea that you need to trust your gut way more than you trust any external knowledge or information that you're getting. And that's exactly what people do. One, just in general. And two, especially when there's so much stuff going on and there's a heightened level of anxiety and fear. And the thing that you're going to go back to in any one of these things, I could tell you how much it hurts to put your hand on a hot burner, right? I could show you pictures and graphics and give you stats on everything. What is going to be the biggest deterrent of doing that? Getting your hand on that burner. Right? It's that idea that we are such anecdotal people and we are such experiential people that's the thing that we gravitate towards most. And when it comes to seeing numbers and listen to experts, unfortunately, it's easier to just think about internalizing what you've seen in the past and act on that knowledge rather than the things that you are told that you may not have time to go and fact check or look up or find a trusted source for. So I think that anecdotal knowledge and experiential knowledge is the stuff that we make the majority of our decisions off.
Well, absolutely. And that's been a theme of yours throughout looking at these Politico pieces. Is like, unless the COVID really impacts you, it's going to be hard to come away with any lasting lessons. But can I flip what you're saying for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
And say, that's kind of exactly what I'm saying, is that for a lot of Americans, their experience of the last 20 years has, like, anecdotally been highly negative. And so they don't want to hear how everything's better for everybody and how the system's working better. And they don't want to hear about those like feel-good commercials that the banks are putting out, or whoever with the ukulele music in the back of the commercial. Their experience is that it's actually really negative for them. And so I feel like this is seen as an attack on expertise. But another way to see it is it's just an attack on resources. Now, whatever group has the resources can exert expertise. You can come up with a study that says one thing, and if you give me the money, I can come up with a study that says the exact opposite. We know this is true.
Yeah. Now, this is also interesting. So these worlds don't work exclusively from each other. So you have this interesting mixture of anecdotal and experiential, kind of that truthiness, what I'm talking about, and where the rubber meets the road on the CDC guidelines and what's going on. And I think that there's two things that you see. One, just go outside now as compared to last week. There's so many more people with masks. And that's a good thing, but it's because of the social snowballing that takes place in that part. The CDC will say something, and all of those stats are backed up by scientific evidence on flattening the curve and this, that, the other thing. But until you see your neighbor wearing that mask, it's the same reason why we got into the toilet paper fiasco and the hand sanitizer fiascos. It's because if you are in your bubble and something enters that bubble and you see that and observe it for yourself, now you're going to be acting. And so I think that you do have these situations where the individual has heard about this stuff, but until they see another person doing that action or that preventative measure, then they don't do it until that point.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really true. And in terms of boots on the ground, that's really true. I do think that America, if we want Americans to believe in experts, we have to reform some institutions that have been given carte blanche to go after people. Like that's the problem. And I do want to do that. Did you ever listen to that Michael, what's the guy's name? Michael Lewis's Against the Rules podcast?
No.
This is exactly what he talks about. He talks about how all of these different situations are rigged. They're rigged in the favor of the people who can afford to rig them. And, he wrote Moneyball. He wrote all these great books, Liar's Poker. He's excellent. That, with the reading The Unwinding, George Packer's book, will really illuminate. That book was written before 2016. And you read that book and you're like, oh, okay. Like here I am jumping from one cappuccino to another, but like there's this whole other world out there. So this populist movement isn't based on just like not caring. It's quite the opposite. The attack on expertise comes from people who are hurting and feel like experts have let them down because the experts have been hired. I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't know if I should just make me do this one small tangent, Waylon. Did you ever see they did a documentary about the housing crisis and they got this Columbia professor and they nailed him so hard because this guy had written a academic study about how the Icelandic banks were in great shape. And then after the housing crisis, he changed the title of the study to say Icelandic banks are in trouble and put it on his resume. And they have him in the interview and they said, can you take a look at this? Because this thing on your resume that says that the Icelandic banks are in trouble, this paper was originally titled Iceland. And I mean, he just couldn't do anything. He just sat there like, and we had that with the banking crisis too. So here's my hope is that, you know, during times of need, meritocracy reasserts itself. You know, you look at General Grant and Stonewall Jackson and General Lee, they were all super backbenchers before the Civil War. You know, Grant was working at a clothing store. Stonewall Jackson, I'm not, by the way, in support of the Confederacy. I'm just talking about.
Well, like J.C. Penney's, he's like inside of J.C. Penney's just.
No,
Do you like Levi jeans?
It was even worse. I think it was his father-in-law's store. And he had totally
Mr. Woolsworth.
He totally washed out. But the point is that, like, I'll give you another example. Hollywood had crashed so bad in the late 60s that they're like, all right, I guess we should let these young directors make movies because we don't know how to do it anymore. George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese. When there's a need, institutions' hierarchy will shake up and excellence will reassert itself in those institutions because it's necessary. When it's not necessary, everyone can play politics and games and get to the top. But when you actually need an expert, someone presents itself.
Now, here's another thing when we're talking about experts. Here's a question I pose. Who actually needs the experts, right? When you think about it, so you were talking about the heart doctors getting together, and aside from the drop, that component of it, the experts need the experts, and the experts need those in charge that are enacting legislation or executive orders or these all of these things. So as long as you have the attention of the individuals that are open to these discussions and are actively in these leadership positions, those are the individuals that you need to lead and guide what's going on. Because I'm not saying that everybody can't be have time for the experts, but I certainly hope that our leaders are open and receptive, because that's their job, is to understand the information, analyze it, and react accordingly. So to some extent, I understand where people come where people come from when they're like, I just don't have time to do this fact checking or to listen to this expert because I have to take care of my family and I need to think about unemployment in my job and my higher anxiety and stress and all of this stuff because I elected an individual to do that for me, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that you really want to do is emphasize is if not everybody's going to listen to the experts, who are the people that we absolutely need to be essentially listening to?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And in the reverse, a good president is like a good film director. They hire a director of photography because that's the look they're going to get. There's stuff that they just can't decide, that they trust that the sound person is really good or the casting person is really good. That's what executive functioning is. And so you also hope that that's going on top down as well as top up. But then you really want institutions to give you experts that aren't just political infighters that work their way up through the ranks, but people who actually know what they're talking about. And you do get that in times of crisis. Someone will present. I'm actually reading Churchill, a book on Churchill right now, Splendid Vile, which is, he's definitely had merit. But it took the invasion of the lowlands before Churchill became prime minister and was able to exert his excellence. So that's the hope. All right, why don't we kind of take ourselves on the out here, Waylon? I have to say, of all the pieces we've read, this is the one where I'm kind of the most antagonistic towards it. I don't know about you. I mean, it makes sense that we might be, but what's your last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a pragmatic optimist. That's how I view myself, and this one was something that was a little bit too idealist for me. But I certainly hope people are thinking about experts, and I certainly hope that we can kind of communally understand that there's some people that we should listen to and some people that we should not listen to. Although unfortunately, that's a little harder to do in our society nowadays. But yeah, I would say that this one didn't hit the mark for me.
Yeah, although I say listen to everybody. Listen to everybody. It's okay. It's okay to expose yourself.
I would say understand everybody, and listen and understand everybody, but don't necessarily follow everybody.
Right. And if I can just add to that, if someone you really don't like says something that actually makes sense, incorporate it. You can divorce yourself from, if you don't like the president, that's fine. But every once out of 40 times, the president might say something. You're like, well, actually, that's kind of a good point. Maybe we should look at it. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because then we don't get access to that important question. All right, folks. Well, you've been listening to the Free Associates. It's the Whale Dog and I, the BIQ, the barbarian in question. We are old compadres. We are separated by this pandemic. Although, Waylon, my dream bro date with you is that you take the new van, you park it in my driveway, we get a fire going in the back, and you can sleep in your van. I'll be in the house. We'll keep social distancing.
How about this? How about I drive the van into the back, and through the pane of glass, we can communicate.
The boy in the bubble. You don't know that. That's
John Travolta. Come on now.
Oh, he does it.
I got it.
All right, guys. Well, listen, we can always find all episodes. We podcast them if you're listening to WMUA Amherst. Thanks for listening to us. If you're on Facebook Live, then please go to the Free Associates page, join us, and we'll be continuing doing this throughout the quarantine as such. And we look forward to the time where we can all have a live in-person Free Association spaghetti dinner. That's my goal. Waylon, what's your plan for the day? You're gonna sand that van down?
Yeah, I'm gonna sand that down. I'm gonna stain it. I'm gonna see how far I can get. Hopefully 2 levels of poly. Think about the tires, but we'll see.
Yeah, those rims need work, man.
Yeah.
You're gonna need to get some rims for those. Yeah. And the color. But we'll figure that out. And I am gonna get as much vitamin D as I can out there. The parks are closed, but the streets aren't. So boogie down while they're at. We're entering the next couple of weeks. It's gonna be for real. So stay safe, but also stay sane. And if you're one of our students, we're grading you now. So we'll get back in class. All right, thanks so much for being with the Free Associates, and we'll see you real soon.